That was wonderful. And thank you for the presenters who chipped in further about the thoughts. What are the question of faculty advocacy and faculty involvement, I think, are a central part of this conversation. SSRC has given us a tremendous gift in laying out a set of challenges in the realm of social data and grand challenges for the information society. And I think that those critical questions around the infrastructure to support scholarship and research are fundamental questions that libraries are asking themselves, and we're asking, of course, each other today. How do we support that infrastructure? The recommendations in that report, I think, are reverberating and far-reaching. The changing nature of the data provision and the data use of that materials, the changing nature and how we access it, who controls it, what we can do with it, and researcher training, data ethics, data literacy, all of these things which are only going to be more critical as we move further and further into the born digital and big data world that we're all faced with today. One of the most, the sentence that jumped out in 28-point font, red color, in that report for me was the statement that said, forging such a compact of partnership between institutions requires all of us to think beyond the institutional and interdisciplinary and disciplinary silos in which we typically operate. I mean, that is absolutely the biggest statement in this report that stood out for me, is that all of us are grappling with these challenges. All of us are potentially dealing individually with data providers, with how to handle researcher output, with all of these various bits and bytes and recombinations of materials. And we need to think about these things at a system-wide level. We need to find the support structures that we can rely on as a community of academic libraries to support that scholarship and research. That is, of course, typically what CRL has been for the past 7 decades, which is an interinstitutional collaborative, a community of libraries thinking about big challenges and seeking common solutions in ways that an individual library or faculty member who can't deal with something alone can turn to. I wanted to just draw a couple examples of the ways these problems can be solved at scale and how they were done in the past. The first one I wanted to mention, since we're talking about data, in particular social science data, I'm going to harken back to the wonderful past examples of the census reports from the 1960s. Census microdata really got its start, only in the mid 20th century, as a result of the expansion of social science research and the interests in learning more and more specific research questions that come out of that census. So in 1962, the Census Bureau drew up a 1 in 1,000 extract of the basic data tapes for use to study at a micro level some of the household information that was created during the publication of the census itself. To preserve the confidentiality, they anonymized the data, they put it out on tapes for, at the time, I'm sure it was a fairly exorbitant charge of $1,500 for each institution, and very few institutions had computers that could handle that kind of data. So they also produced 18,000 punch cards, for the more traditional computation of this material. Because that data was used so heavily and there was such an interest in it, when the 1970s census was coming around, researchers were really hungry to have comparative data for these types of materials. And one of the wonderful things that I discovered not too long ago that CRL did, in 1972, CRL, as a result of the concerns of the community and the interest in this data, CRL obtained funding from the National Science Foundation to make a new version of the 1960 sample. The new version enlarged the sample density from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 100, and reorganized the coding schemes and the record layouts to be compatible with those same systems from the 1970s. I am quoting here for attribution, of course, the International Encyclopedia of the Social and Behavioral Sciences, and this article is written by Stephen Ruggles, another Ruggles in the conversation around data. Of course, many of you know Stephen through his visionary and pioneering work in creating the integrated public use microdata series, IPUMS, that is housed, again, at the University of Minnesota, where IPUMS sought to reconcile the differences between the various census pieces across all of the 8 censuses at the time that had been using microdata, and has continued to go back and recreate samples, extending all the way back as far as they can. CRL has now been in conversations over the past couple of years with IPUMS about looking at ways that we can expand that kind of collaborative work, that open access work that is critical for scholarship, and expand it on a global level to look at the census data that has been published in other parts of the world. And where available, of course, the microdata series are the most important and critical pieces for IPUM's point of view, but also figuring out ways that we can handle the aggregate data where there is not other available information, to commonize, to reconcile those data points into something that could be useful at a truly global scale. This, to me, is one of the most exciting things that I can think of to work on in the next couple of years, and we would love your support and indications of interest to make that happen, because it's a complicated and potentially costly endeavor to do that. But if the interest of the community is there in sustaining that or supporting us in pursuing external funds, crowdsourcing money to help us do this, we would love to continue that conversation. A second example I just wanted to mention, Bernie has frequently talked about some of CRL's forethought or foresight in collecting materials that at the time didn't seem to have much application or current use or interest among the scholars to make that available. And we frequently talk about the records of the Brazil military tribunals for the people who were interrogated and or disappeared and or put on trial in Brazil during the military dictatorship. One thing I wanted to highlight as part of that narrative, though, was those files were very well codified and organized by the military itself in its storage. And they created all sorts of chains of documentation about this material in terms of, what court did it go to, who was the judge, who were the people who were giving the trials, who were the victims, what political parties, what were their demographics. And all of this, to me, is an amazing data set. And with our work with the Federal Prosecutor's Office in Brazil, we were able to supply those original files on microfilm because we were the only organization that still had a complete set of this material. Paper copies still existed in Brazil, but they had been, taken apart or lost or destroyed or just, basically in disarray. So they used the microfilm to recreate a digital version of this, and they took all of that data and they reshaped it into searchable systems on their website so that you can now, with a click of a button, go through all of the analysis of this material. It's something that we're rightfully proud of, and that's why we bring it up all the time, because these are big things that are done through the support of the community and those who understand the data and know what is important for CRL to be collecting, even if it can't be supported on your campus. So this is why we're having this conversation today, is that system solutions, cooperative efforts, are important to us just as they are important to you. And we would love to be able to continue to have you rely on us to do the kind of work that needs to be done, especially as Matthew was saying, sometimes you cannot get it supported on campus because you just don't have the funds, you just don't have the backing of enough of the student body or the faculty. We should be thinking about ways to expand that and bring it out into the community. CRL has created certain platforms now on its site, one called Global Collections, in which libraries can suggest resources that are important for, say, digitization or cooperative funding. And we've been beta testing this as a place to bring these ideas up, bubbling up from beneath in ways that we can bring them together, find the communities who can give us more information about it, eventually, prioritize and even potentially fund these materials to go forward. So we're trying to create pathways ourselves, I think, in giving the community the support that it's looking for in these types of problems. I couldn't help but take note that in the 52-page SSRC report, the word library appeared only twice. First, with the name of the Public Library of Science, and second, in reference to the ability to find a 16th century book on a library shelf. That to me felt a little regressive and a little short-sighted in terms of the library's role in securing knowledge, which is the title of the report. Of course, to secure knowledge, you need institutions, you need repositories, you need data stewards for this type of material. So I found myself a little, well, I was relieved, of course, when Dr. Nelson came in and they talked about some of the foregrounded reports that did involve librarians in this conversation. But the Task Force to Secure Knowledge, although replete with eminent scholars, lacked anybody from the information world that could help respond to some of the things we are doing. Today was a great manifestation, and today and yesterday were great manifestations of what the library is doing to help secure this knowledge. So I believe that we need to respond to this report positively and forcefully, that we are there at the table already trying to conquer some of these challenges. And I think as a group and as folks who have faculty who are attending future meetings to discuss the SSRC report, I understand through the text that they were going to be taking this around the various associations and having those conversations. We should be at that table as those who are responsible for this data and for supporting the faculty research in these areas. We should make sure we've inserted ourselves into the conversation about the importance of the funding, and about the long-term effects of that funding and how do we support this going on, about the infrastructure that we have in support of this and the infrastructure that we need. And in pointing to some of the stellar examples that we've seen during the course of these 2 days. This report, of course, calls ultimately for a new compact between institutions and potentially to form a data commons that can help navigate some of the challenges of this data. And I think we've seen that data commons, or at least pieces of it already, through the presentations over the past 3 sessions. And included ICPSR, of course, and in Canada, of course, the Scholars Portal Dataverse and the journal repository, and all of these materials that the Ontario institutions can consult at scale. Those repositories are there and are being built as we speak. IPUMS, of course, being another fundamental and important one. And of course, the Public Broadcasting Archives seems to be another great promising lead in this. We need to make sure that we have continued conversations about these emerging and best practices in terms of responding back to the scholars, that we are there and that we can point them the way to the data as they need it. I think some of the other themes that I noted as challenges and as opportunities for the community. Identifying the kinds of data that we need. I've heard specifically from many folks along on the side, a lot of times the frustration of the liaisons and the selectors when they're approached for sources of data, not exactly sure where to turn to. Elizabeth herself mentioned to me over lunch, she knows all of these things, but she doesn't deal with, say, the foreign language material, so you have to turn to the international studies liaisons for that. So we need a broader, more common understanding of the kinds of data, the sources, and how to obtain those. Navigating permissions, that's another huge thing that we've heard throughout the entire conversation, is how do we deal with the providers of this information? Many of our presenters discussed negotiations with library-friendly providers. Many of them, are used to dealing with libraries and are able to negotiate licenses. We didn't talk so much about the licenses from the third-party commercial providers and those that have these impossible clauses, except we're not allowed to talk about them. And that we need to engage more in the conversations and strategies around those. Bernie mentioned in the sum up before lunch that CRL has put a lot of groundwork into looking at the terms of licensing specifically for the purchase or licensing of data sets or data resources. And this was something that is subject for ongoing conversation and evolution among the community. We've put it up on our site in draft form. We received dozens of comments from helpful librarians in the business world, the geospatial world, the economics world, in the types of language, and, well, why did you state it this way? Or, oh my gosh, we've never thought to put that in our license. So we revised that. We've put it up on our site as a Google Doc that anybody can continue to comment on. So we look at this as an evolving, living document to share best practices, approaches, language that you can insert, things to avoid in your licenses, and an ongoing conversation among the community about what works, what doesn't work, and what is further needed. And engaging those producers in a healthy conversation, through the licensing expertise at your individual libraries and at your consortium level and at CRL, figuring out ways that we can band together to identify, a common protocol for the licensing of this material is going to be, I think, a tremendous opportunity for the community going forward. Can we work on a standard declaration of principles, much as they did early on with dealing with commercial providers or those who are coming in to try to digitize from our collections? Could we put together a common set of principles that individually or as a community we could put forward when, if Facebook says, yes, but, we need you to do this, we could say, we just don't do that, and here's why, and here's how we protect your data. I like very much the idea of a library passport in a sense that, we have the systems, we have the protocols in order to secure and store your data. Here's the set of parameters. Here's the types of things that we do. It's up on our website, and that it's been cleared by multiple other producers, just to get that conversation rolling so you don't have to do it over and over and over again. So bringing this kind of information together, bringing the analysis of these collections together through common portals to share some of the unusual terms or some of the things your faculty members have learned. Bryce mentioned a few things over lunch about some of the weird things that Factiva will and won't allow you to do when you're trying to scrape the information through the API. I think everybody should know those things and would love to get those up on a common platform. CRL uses its eDesiderata platform to describe terms and expose content information and other things about products that are out there. We should be listening to our faculty, contributing that out to the common good. That is the group of librarians who are interested in these products, so that they learn from your shared experience in these sort of things. Ultimately, naturally, I'd like to say at the end of these things that, we try to work on community problems. We work at an international level on the big challenges. And those big challenges are what you bring to us. We try, and thank you so much, Darby, for saying that we're always thinking far into the future, farther than some people are willing to hear. But we're always looking out for ways that we can try to head off problems in the that you will encounter as you go. And we really appreciate the feedback that we get from you on that. So where we go really depends on what the community brings to us. And I can't promise anything because I think Greg will kill me, but we really look forward to continuing this conversation and developing further plans of actions and recommendations in this very, very critically important area. We're grateful that Alondra is on our board, so we have a pathway to continue this conversation directly with the highest level of leadership at CRL. And we encourage you to reach out to us individually through your institutions or through the cooperative programs that we've seen in looking for ways that we can continue to support the efforts that you are undertaking bravely and boldly. I just wanted to give a final word of thanks to the presenters for bringing everything to the table yesterday and today. I really hope that everybody was as blown away as I was by what I learned during these conversations. It was enlightening and exciting. It didn't have the usual elements of terror that Bernie brings to the presentations. It was almost uplifting, wasn't it? So thank you so much for your contributions. And we will be putting the slides up as well as the the audio recordings of these presentations on our YouTube channel soon. I don't know. There's Memorial Day, so maybe Tuesday morning. No, it's sometime soon, and we'll let you know when that happens. We encourage you to share those widely with your faculty, with your staff. We encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, as always, so that you get further information. Enough of the promotion. I do want to thank also Bernie for pulling this together and for bringing this conversation to us. Bernie, this has long taken pride in pulling the community together and bringing untold stories and amazing voices to our conversations. And I've heard from many of you that this is in many ways a signature event of the year because you often don't get this type of conversation. So thank you, Bernie, very much for that. And I do want to thank the staff of CRL who worked very hard to pull this together. Virginia Kerr, who's coordinating all of the work here over the past 2 days. Talitha Brown, who's been amazing in putting together the organizations with the Gleacher Center. All of the staff who've helped both with the mics, with our systems team, who have made the online experience hopefully very, very smooth. Hi, everybody. And Mary, Maria, Bethany, everybody who's helped out during the day. Thank you all so much. We're looking forward to having this again next year, and we encourage you to come back. Thank you.